Today I'm going to talk about why I feel like cremation is a better option as opposed to burial. Now, there are some religious practices that cremation is not allowed. With this speech, I am not trying to convert anyone. I am not trying to condemn anyone for their own beliefs and practices. This is just my personal reasonings for this, and I just appreciate you listening to my speech. So, thank you for that. So, what is cremation? Cremation is the process of using heat and flame to reduce a body to its essential elements by using a specially designed furnace known as a cremation chamber. It started around 3000 BC in Europe, but it lost its popularity as the rise of Christianity spread through the Roman Empire. It began to come back into practice again in the 19th century. As opposed to a traditional burial, burial is also known as internment, when the body is put into the ground in a casket or a vault and lowered into the ground and buried. So there are pros and cons to both of them, and today I would like to talk to you about just the pros and cons with cremation. And I'd like to alleviate some of what people feel like are cons for that. So, a pro that I think for cremation over traditional burial is that it is more cost efficient in that sense. So, I'm going to give you a cost for a direct burial versus a direct cremation. Now, these numbers were pulled, and this is pertaining to when a person passes away, the body is cremated or buried. Immediately after a death, there is no viewing, embalming, or additional steps. Okay, so for a cremation, it is around on average $300. The cremation casket, which there actually does have to be a casket that they go in, it is generally made of wood or cardboard because that is burned with the body. It is inexpensive. It is nothing that has to be super durable or kept. So it is going to burn, so it is relatively inexpensive. That runs about $50 bottom dollar. For a basic urn, you can find one for anywhere from about $50 to $100. So for the lowest possible cost of cremation, and now these numbers will fluctuate based off of your region, location, and all of that, but this is just a generalized number for this purpose. So for a basic direct cremation, you're looking at about $400 to $500 for a direct burial. Now this would be with the person immediately after death, being buried straight to the gravesite with a basic marker, no huge headstone, just a marker for where the gravesite is. For the casket itself, you're going to be looking at around $1,000 for the lower end of caskets because they are relatively expensive, being that it does have to have so many standards when it comes to that because you are putting an actual body into the ground. The grave site itself to actually, dig up and do all that work, you're going to look at about $1,500 for that. And a marker, standard marker, nothing super fancy about it, is about $500. So just with that alone, you're looking at a couple of $1,000 as opposed to a couple of $100 for a direct cremation versus a direct burial. This does not include the cost of embalming, which is another $700. This does not include the cost of a funeral director, the church or whatever services that you prefer to use for that, the viewing, any of that would be additional cost. So I'm just speaking in terms of what it actually costs to cremate versus what it would cost to bury. Okay, so that, in my opinion, is a pro as far as cremation goes. It is much cheaper, and that does sound a little But the thing about it is when we pass away, I mean, it's a cost that not all of us plan. It's not something that everybody has thousands of dollars laying around to bury their loved ones. Sometimes we're not always prepared for that. So it's not that I mean to sound cynical about it. It's just very important to be realistic. Another thing is portability. So with that, a lot of people think that this is actually one of the cons of cremation is the fact that you don't have a grave site, you don't have a place to go to have that time with your loved one where you can visit and, you know, have that process and that connection to your loved one. And I disagree. I think that this actually goes into the pros column for me because you would have portability. This does not limit you to one place to where certain people couldn't get to the gravesite. I, for instance, have a grandfather that is buried in Arkansas that I've never been to his gravesite. I live in North Carolina. I have, in my adult years, never visited Arkansas, so I've never been to my grandfather's gravesite. But as far as cremation goes, the family members that I do have cremated, I have a way of being around them, the ones that are close with me. So I think that the fact that that is a much more portable option and you're not stuck into one location for that. It is also very flexible as far as the timeliness goes. So when someone passes away, the process of mourning and grief, it takes time and everyone does it differently. So it's very hard. With cremation, you can go ahead and have the cremation done and you don't have to worry about rushing through the process of getting the viewing and the memorial services done in a timely manner before you run out of time to bury the body. So with that, you do have a little bit more leeway when it comes to services instead of having a time frame to get things done. Also, there are a lot more options. It's not just that fancy looking vase on your grandmother's fireplace that someone ultimately knocks over in a movie and vacuums up and puts back in. There are tons of options nowadays that you can actually put the remains in. They're not a coffee can. You can actually put them in very, very beautiful things. You can now take the ashes and take them to tattoo artists that can mix them in the tattoo ink and get tattoos done of, you know, your loved one's cremated remains. I do want to show a few options. My family we're big believers in cremation. My father passed away in 2010. He was cremated. And my aunt and uncle both passed away in 2020. And we had both of them cremated. And I just want to kind of show people that there are different ways to memorialize them. And it's not just picking out a box. So, for instance, my aunt and my uncle were huge motorcycle riders. They loved it. They absolutely loved it. So for theirs, we chose a replica gas tank and have their ashes mixed in here. Their sons and daughters all got their own pieces of jewelry made from their parts of their ashes. And I have one of them here, actually, one of the sons. It's a little vial with wings, but you can have all kinds of things made. It doesn't have to be this. It can be made into stone and all things. But this is a very cool way to do it, and it's, you know, unique, and you can customize it to their taste. Also, my father who passed away, his is very different. His does not look like a vase. His is actually more like a keepsake box. This is very hard. Like, you're not getting in here. This is sealed. It's not coming out. There's a false top on here that you can open that we do like to put keepsakes and stuff in. When the kids get school pictures, we like to put the school pictures in here because it's our way of staying close with him and, you know, keeping little reminders of big events for us, wishing, you know, he was here. But I did just want to show you a few things of the different options that they had. It's much prettier and nicer than it used to be. It doesn't just have to be a small wooden box or a vase. It can be so many other beautiful things. With that, the another thing about that is, a pro with that is, when you bury a body, the chemicals that you embalm with actually leak into the ground, and it is reported that there are 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde every year seep back into the ground from bodies being buried. So that's going to reduce that. Now, with that, there are greenhouse gas effects from cremation, because you are burning a body and there's a lot of chemicals, there's a lot of fat tissue, there's a lot of things burning off. But there are environmental friendly options that they have come up with now. They have an amazing process now called alkaline hydrolysis that is water cremation. So it's a way of biocremation that is better for the environment. If you're interested in this, I would highly advise, you know, to look up some of these things. So offsetting the greenhouse gas effect, you know, would be to not have that formaldehyde back in the runoff in the groundwater. Another thing is it would alleviate overcrowding. So if everybody continues to get buried, eventually you're just burying bodies on bodies on bodies on bodies, and there's only so much land out there. So what happens when you run out of space to put these bodies? So I think that's another reason for me that cremation is such a viable option, because not only can you either keep them like this, but once, you know, you're ready, or however you prefer, you can spread the ashes. You can do so many things with them. Which brings me to my next point of some really cool environmental friendly options for cremation. Like I had already mentioned, the alkaline hydrolysis. There's also biourns. So you can take your cremated ashes and you can put it in a biourn, which is basically the shell of a tree root. And it's, you have to send them off, and then a company takes them and they put the ashes into this tree root shell and they pack it back into it, and it replants into the ground, and your remains go right back into the earth and become a tree. And essentially you give oxygen for the next generation, because trees provide oxygen that we need for living. So it's a very cool circle of life type thing. There's also a sea burial. So there's an amazing place in Florida. It is a nonprofit. I would suggest anyone that wants to please look this up. They're incredible. It's called Eternal Reefs. They're a nonprofit in Florida that takes the ashes from cremations. It can be from our loved ones, and they also accept donations from pet cremations too, as well. And they take them and they fuse them into these things called reef balls. And once they're done and they make these reef balls, they take them and they put them back into the ocean. And it creates this entire new ecosystem for marine life. It's an incredible thing. So that's definitely an option that I would suggest if anyone wants to check that out as well. So those are just a few of my reasons for that. And I think that cremation is a better option than burial. And I appreciate your time and you listening. Thank you.